Thank you very much. Our next participant is Dr. Gerardo Leiva Parra. He has a degree in economics from the Aguascalientes University with a master's degree in economics from ITAM and also from Cornell University, where he obtained his PhD in growth and economic growth. He formed part of the group of experts in measuring poverty from the UN known as Grupo de Rio and the Technical Committee for Measuring Poverty in Mexico that resulted in the first official methodology to measure this phenomenon in the country. He has participated in several international groups of experts in statistical measures. He's member of the Technical Advisory Council of the Private Sector Economic Studies Center, the Technical Committee of the IMEF, and the Advisory Council of the Economic Observatory of the UAM. He's also the technical leader of Realidad, Datos y Espacio, an international statistics magazine. He participated in the editorial board of several magazines and has taught in several universities. He has 18 years experience in INEGI. He has been analyst, advisor of the president, director of economic censuses, and general deputy director of economic statistics. As of April 2009, he is the general deputy director of research in INEGI, and he is studying a diploma in positive psychology in Ibero. So please, Dr. Leiva, he's going to talk about the consistency of result, I guess, the consistency of the result regarding subjective well-being. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be with you. To begin, I'm going to ask some questions as an excuse for what I'm going to present. And these questions, of course, were already mentioned by Dr. Diener, are related to whether we can know the subjective well-being of people through surveys. When we began to work on this issue, we found a huge amount of reticencies, suspicions, both colleagues and other experts, and they said, are you trying to find out something about, well, something that we don't have enough elements to know the inside of people and know what's going on in their inside? The other question is, what people say about their subjective well-being makes sense or has consistency when they answer a questionnaire. Another objection that we have faced is that they say, if you ask me from 0 to 10, how happy you are, how satisfied you are with your life, for me, it's a 6, and for you, it's a 10. And at the end, the information I obtain cannot be comparable because we are not going to find any pattern to identify a relevant conclusion for in order to obtain comparable information. So can we find a significant patterns? I have 3 charts here. This is what some people say that are not very convinced, is that what you obtain, you would obtain what we can see in chart C. It's a series of points. Each person says what they believe is correct to say, and the tags or labels people have for well-being are not consistent, or maybe we find things that are related to other phenomena. For instance, we could think that the more education, the more satisfaction with life, or the more prevalence with diseases, the more satisfaction with life. So can we find this kind of relationships? And the answers are essentially twofolded. The first one is the consistency of methods that has already been discussed, so I'm going to pass this quickly. And the second part is related to patterns of answers in the surveys. I'm going to use a survey that we use to show you some patterns in the answers. So first, regarding the consistency of the methods, it was already mentioned that the activity on the prefrontal left brain lobe is related to positive feelings, and at the same time this is correlated to other type of evaluations, like how frequent people smile, or opinions of third parties, that is, people who know that person closely, or the answers given by persons in questionnaires, in-depth questionnaires like those applied by psychologists in their studies for diagnosis, or the questionnaires that we use in statistical surveys. What we can see is, in general, there's a great consistency on how we extract information from people regarding their level of happiness. The other answer of the questions is related to this consistency of the results, and I'm going to show you some of the results of our well-being subjective module known as VIARE, or self-reported well-being. This is a pioneer effort in Mexico's statistics. That is, we haven't done anything like this before. It was applied not as an isolated questionnaire, but it was a model of a much larger survey with a lot of information, which is the National Household Expenditure Survey, where we collect information about the expenditure, the demographics of the households, the characteristics of the houses, and many economic, social, demographic, and physical elements of the households. We have the possibility of crossing the results of the questions about subjective well-being with certain objective elements to have a richer analysis. This questionnaire was made from a draft of the OECD recommendations. We used other elements such as the European Social Survey, the experience of INEGI, a questionnaire people fill out by themselves. The population is from 18 and 70 years, and we collected more than 10,000 questionnaires, and the information is available in our websites. So what are we talking about? Evaluations regarding life satisfaction and happiness, and we also talk about affections, like or moods, like being happy, or being calm, or negative feelings like being mad or sad. So how did we ask the questions? From a scale from 0 to 10. In general, how satisfied are you with your life? We don't use the Decanter scale as Gallup, but we use a reference bar. To measure the feelings is how happy did you feel yesterday from 1 to 10, how calm did you feel, how mad, how sad. For happiness, it's the same from 0 to 10. Tell us how happy are you. So with these questions, we found that the values, the average values, are quite curious rather than being important at the national level. What's interesting, in fact, is to see what's behind of those who have lower levels and those who have higher levels of subjective well-being. Here, we found that men and women answer quite the same. Both for life satisfaction, we have 8, and happiness, average 8.4. In terms of emotional balance, we added with positive sign the positive feelings and negative the the negative feelings. If someone only has positive feelings, his emotional balance is 1. If he only has negative feelings at the maximum intensity and no positive feelings, so his emotional balance is -1. So in this scale from -1 to +1, Mexicans on average are in 0.5, both men and women. If we divide this by 4 imaginary figures, we're in the 3rd tier. We have 3 goods per every bad one. With regard to age, in other countries like the US, Japan, there's a U relationship in life satisfaction and well-being. In our case, this is a very mild relationship that is expressed in the life satisfaction indicator. But I present this, and we run some econometric models, and this relationship survives the application of controls. So we do see that as we get older, let's say when we are 45 years old, things tend to be worse. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel for those of us. I still cling to that idea. Then we also have life satisfaction and schooling levels. We see a contrast between those with no education. They have a rate on average of 7.6 compared to those with graduate studies. And as we move along these education degrees, we see that the life satisfaction increases. However, I should say that when you incorporate this as a part of an econometric model and you add controls for income and status, this relationship tends to be weaker or disappears.
Whether you're married or not, don't be scared, but a single is slightly higher than married in terms of life satisfaction. However, when we incorporate certain controls, such as, single people tend to be younger, and they used to be slightly happier when they're young. But when we control for other demographical and economic issues, we see that people who are either married or living together with somebody or are in the first rung, and then we find the widow, then and last place would be divorced. In terms of the relation with expenses, because we saw this as part of the national survey for expenses, and contrary to what happens in other surveys, we control for expenses with great precision, and we took several samples of population according to their expense levels. We have 1 would be lowest expenses and 5th highest. When we advance in expense levels, we have more life satisfaction, but also more happiness. But it's highest when it comes to life satisfaction, well, mostly because it probably has to do with cognitive issues. These sheets here. But let me explain. This on the horizontal axis we have life satisfaction. On the vertical we have affection balance. The first one, one is evaluative, the other is emotive. Ways of seeing well-being. So, in order to avoid to see discussing which one is better, we have the vertical dotted line, which is the national average for life satisfaction, which we said is 8, and the horizontal dotted line is the national the national average for economic for emotional balance, which is 0.5, and the black cross, is the point where the averages converge. So if I'm to the top right, then I have more of both. So I'm unambiguously better. I have more satisfaction and more but if I'm below it, then I have less life satisfaction and less affection balance, or balance in terms of affection. And these would be averages according to specific population groups. For instance, those who have alcoholism in their homes are way below the national average. If they have drug addiction, it's even lower than the national average. If they were happy during childhood, they're above the national average. Same for those who were happy in their teenage years. If they report that their either a parent has died, same if they say that a close friend has died, or also the death of of their companion or significant other. If it's your child who died, then it's much lower than if it's another close person. Then if you have not been mistreated or discriminated against, if you haven't been discriminated against, or if you don't report it, at least you're above the average. Who has is clearly below. Those who had better education opportunity than their parents are above the average. Those who had better work opportunities than their parents, same thing. It's what happens with the just level of life in general. And you can see that those who had better opportunities or life levels or work opportunities or educational opportunities are below the average. And in general, those who had a lower life level than parents are also much below. Those who report having obtained any sort of compliments are above, but those who say, I've never been complimented or recognized, is clearly below. So we can see that there's a clear way of showing how people could feel better without paying more. Just recognizing their work can be very valuable. If nobody in your family has a delicate disease, you're above the average, but if someone is sick, then you're below the average, especially if we're talking about your son or daughter. You don't need to be rich, but if you didn't require for any help to pay for your expenses for you to be above average. So if you didn't require any money for your expenses, if you lost your harvest, your business, or you lost your job, or you needed help, then you're below the average. If you have a family member in prison, that reduces your balance, but not life satisfaction. But if the family member is lost or disappeared, then it goes down. Or if you've been threatened by somebody you don't know, or you've been physically attacked, then that has quite an effect. So when we had the press conference and we presented results, we said, hey, INEGI, how are you measuring happiness? How can people be happy with this security crisis? Well, what happens is that we reach relatively high values, but those who are suffering directly because of insecurity, they have a greater disadvantage in terms of subjective well-being. Another important point is if we compare physical aggressions from somebody who's unknown, and you compare it to somebody who receives aggression from somebody they know, somebody who they live with, their level of satisfaction is much lower. So this is an important sign, so that we not only pay attention what happens on the streets in terms of violence, but that we recognize that there are things happening inside the household which have a clear negative effect on people, especially women who are victims of domestic abuse. Other interesting things, well, it's no longer time for New Year's resolutions, but we can still reflect on the importance of exercise. Who does competitive physical exercise are way above those who don't do it competitively, but it still hurts. If you don't do any exercise at all, you're way below. If you do volunteer work or environmental work, or if you provide help to third parties who are not part of your household, are way above the average, and those who don't help other people are way below the average. And what we say is that giving gives you back. So you don't only benefit from giving, from receiving. If you give, this affects your well-being. So people who have made important decisions without pressure from other people are above those who have not. If you haven't made decisions freely, you're below. If in your free time you do activities that allow you to grow as a person, you're above. If you don't have rational use of your free time, then you're below. And since I'm finishing here. The point is of all this is, well, that the INEGI has its first results, the experimental ones, but we're going to work a bit more on this subject, and what we've found so far shows us that these surveys can provide us useful information for understanding the levels and the correlations between subjective well-being of people, and and as has been mentioned here before, if well-being isn't subjective, then it doesn't exist. So these are not. We see that the points are not just scattered randomly around the chart. They have direct correlation to very specific behaviors, and the patterns we have found can be incorporated into public policy. Thank you. Our last participant is Dr. Marco Mira Dercol. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Well, I will translate his bio so you don't have to put on your headsets just yet. He's the head of the Division for Household Statistics and Progress Measurement in the Statistics Directorate of the OECD. He has worked on measures of well-being, income distribution, and various aspects of social policies. He was editor of the 2010 edition of the OECD Fact Book and of the 2005 and 2007 editions of Society at a Glance and OECD social indicators. He was also among the main contributors of the OECD report, Growing Unequal Income Distribution and Poverty in OECD Countries. He has been one of the rapporteurs of the Commission on the measurement of economic performance and social progress established by President Sarkozy in early 2008. Since joining the OECD, he has worked in the Directorate for Employment, Labor, and Social Affairs, in the Economics Department, and in the private office of the OECD Secretary General, as well as spending 2 years at the International Monetary Fund. He holds a degree in economics from the University of Modena and an MPhil from Oxford University. Marco Miratercole will speak of the OECD guidelines on subjective well-being.
La guía del OECD para la determinación del bienestar subjetivo. Por favor.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It is for me a great pleasure to be here. It is in fact the second time I visited Mexico City for a similar conference. The previous one was in May 2011 to participate to a regional conference that we organized together with INEGI and the Foro Científico y Tecnológico, and at that point was to talk about this work, which was still at the beginning. So it is for me a great pleasure to be back because the work has been done. It was an important achievement for us and something we can tick on the list of tasks that we have in front of us. We released a report on 20 March this year, World Happiness Day, and the work reflected the contribution of many actors. I mean, not only the Secretariat in the OECD who actually prepared the report, but the engagement of national statistical offices, INEGI in the first place, in providing comments to various drafts of the report, some of them in testing some of the measures that have been suggested in some of their experimental surveys, and also they reflected the support that we received from an eminent group of experts that acted as an advisor to the OECD project, which included at dinner and John Halliwell and many others. And so to all of them is our gratitude for the result that has been accomplished. Now, what are these guidelines about? Well, they are about providing advice on the collection and use of measures of subjective well-being. So the primary clients, in a sense, are the producers of this type of data, producers both in national statistical offices, but also in the many non-government organizations that have initiated measures in these fields. So advice in terms of how to design, collect, and publish measure on the subject. But also another important client for us was the users. So who may be interested in how to interpret, analyze, and report on these measures. The long-term goal of the measure was, in a sense, the one of improving the cross-country comparability of these measures by establishing common concept, classification, and methods. And to achieve these goals, the guidelines cover issues that have to do with the concept and validity of the measures, the methodological issues that are confronted when implementing them, in identification of best practices in measuring, the type of output and analysis that can be supported, and to propose a set of prototype survey questions on subjective well-being that we are hoping that national statistical offices and data producer could progressively take on board in their data collection. But first of all, I mean, what subjective well-being is about? The report put forward a definition which is, by and large, taken from work that Ed Diner has done in this field, and which reads as follows. Good mental states, including all of the various evaluations, positive and negative, that people make of their life, and the affective reaction of people to their experiences. Now, in reaction to this definition, some of the newspapers, more recently The Guardian, say, oh, it's terribly complicated, no one will ever be able to repeat it. And it is true that it's complicated, but to some extent because the concepts of just subjective well-being, as was mentioned earlier, covers a range of aspects. And the aspects or components are those that are depicted on the horizontal axis of that chart. We are talking about life satisfactions, understood as a reflective assessment of people's on their life as a whole, on an aspect of them. Affect, which is the term that psychologists use for people's feelings and emotional states, and measure of eudaimonic well-being of psychological functioning, which was one of the issues that was raised in question to at dinner, and which encompasses concept of competence, autonomy, meaning, and purpose in life. We have been engaging in this agenda as part of a broader range of activities, which basically aimed to make and to take seriously the case about measuring performance beyond GDP. So the argument that we made in this How is Life report and in a series of other publications was that it is not a higher volume of economic production that can be taken as an ultimate goal for any meaningful approach to public policy. It is something more fundamental, something that has a claim to be relevant in itself, and this is what well-being is about. We are taking subjective well-being as being one critical element of overall well-being, but not the only one. And this was something that was mentioned by Ed in his own introduction. Now, why we have been engaged in this field? I mean, a big part of the motivation came from the recommendation of the Stiglitz-Senfi Commission, which identified in the, when was it, in 2009, subjective well-being as a key element of quality of life, and made this recommendation 10, which was mentioned before, which says measures of subjective well-being provide key information about people's quality of life. Statistical offices should incorporate questions to capture people's life evaluation, hedonic experiences, and priorities in their own work. Now, as soon as the recommendation was formulated, many statistical offices engaged in this field. So evaluative measures of subjective well-being have been introduced in official service in countries as diverse as Mexico, Italy, the UK, Morocco, Europe. And the same has happened although to a smaller degree, with affect measures which have been introduced in time use service, both in the US and in France, which is all good, but carries with it a risk of proliferation of competing measures and the risk of losing something important that you could gain from the comparison of these measures across countries. So our view was that for this official measure to be useful, it was essential that they are collected in a consistent manner, and because this will facilitate comparison across countries, and will provide a baseline for developing better questions in the future. Now, the chapter of the guidelines cover concept and validity, methodological consideration, measurement approaches, and reporting, and it is on the first three that I would like to say something. Now, on the concept and validity, one of the goals that we had when we engaged in this process was to take stock of what is known on the statistical validity of the measure. And somewhat to our surprise, we found out that the evidence is, in a sense, much broader than the one that exists for many of the other aspects of economic condition. Maybe not, I will not go as far as to say that we know more on subjective well-being than we know of the national accounts, but it is surely the case when you look at some of the micro measure for people's consumption expenditures or morbidity or many other fields. And out of this evidence, we could conclude that the quality of subjective well-being is in general adequate when you look at aspects such as validity, response burden, but of course no challenges remain in other fields, and that's why there is an important research agenda ahead of us. In terms of the concept and validity, I mean, the point has already been made that subjective well-being is multidimensional. It includes different aspects. The reason why it is important, the point is important to make, is when you look at the correlation of these measures across individuals in a broad range of countries, you see that the correlations are far from being from unity, but in the sense that they are far from being very strong. The table summarizes a result on correlation coefficient for measures of purpose, life satisfaction, positive affect and negative affect across 360,000 people in the Gallup poll, all pulled together, and it shows that if you look at the column for purpose, the correlation with life satisfaction is of the order of 0.13, correlation with positive affect 0.14, correlation with negative affect minus 0.1. They are a bit higher when you look at life satisfaction. Is correlation with positive and negative affect. They are higher when you look at correlation between positive affect and negative affect, but we are far from having a consistent reporting of this measure across individuals. And the same applies if instead of pulling all the individuals together, you look at individual countries, compute the correlation, and then average. And at that point, you have the additional finding that there's a broad stylized fact that the poorer the countries are in terms of subjective, or in terms of GDP per capita, the less purpose in life is correlated with anything else. Now, on the validity, of course, there are different ways of thinking of the validity of the measure. Ed Diener talked this morning about what do we know about the convergent validity. There are two additional aspects that are discussed in quite detail in the guidelines. One is about the concept of construct validity, which basically it is whether the measures behave in the way that we expect it to do. And probably the most persuasive evidence of the constructive validity of the survey measures that are collected comes from a study from Richard Lucas, which looked based on panel data for a German survey, how life satisfaction changes with people's disability. And why it is important? Because it shows that something that you would expect a priori, that the more severe are the type of disability that impact on people, the more important will be the effect on subjective well-being. And also, you see that there is very little evidence that people adapt after the disability as a stroke. And so adaptation may be an important feature in some dimensions of life conditions, but not in others. Another element of statistical quality is face validity, whether or not the survey question that people are asked map into some type of intuitive understanding that they have about the concept that they're being inquired. One type of evidence that bear on this assessment is when you look at the facility that people have in responding to the questions. And here you have two panels. The one on the right shows, based on evidence from the Gallup poll, that a refusal to answer for life satisfaction are in fact smaller than the one that you have in the case of education and marital status. They are in all cases well below 1%. It is even more interesting when you compare it with evidence on income, which is the panel on the left, based on data from the World Value Survey, which shows that people have much greater ease and facility in answering questions about life satisfaction than they have to answering questions about income. Now, what do we take out of this body of evidence? That, by and large, the evidence on validity and the reliability is well established. Of course, there are some important methodological limitations, but there is, in general, no case for considering this measure as beyond the scope of official statistics, which have been the type of reactions that we are typically being confronted with in the past when we were talking about this measure with official statisticians. So there is a case for official measure to be collected, possibly as experimental, test this different type of formulation, because that would be a way for developing a better generation of measures in the future. But of course, there are still challenges ahead, and there are three in particular that I would like to highlight. The first has to do with the signal-to-noise ratio. The problem, put simply, is that most of the available measures on which the evidence that has been shown today are based come from non-official surveys, which have a very small sample size, with two obvious implications. For one, when you look at time series, so it is a chart on the right. This shows for France evidence on the life satisfaction based on the Eurobarometer question, which is available for a long period of time. It has a positive upward trend, but there is also a lot of noise. So if you are trying to measure it based on observation just for a subset of the period, it will be very difficult to detect. But the same problems affect measures of cross-country comparison at a point in time. You are all familiar with the argument that beyond a given level of income, the payoff of higher income in terms of subjective well-being maybe is very low, but one consequence of the fact that the measurement error is high and the effect is low is that it would when you look at evidence on these features, it may often conclude that there is no effect that is measured while instead a better precision would allow to detect it. So the type of response, the type of general principle that we recommended in the guideline are very simple. The first one is measure frequently, at least annually, because if you don't do it, it will be very difficult to detect any meaningful trend. Second, try to enumerate, in terms of number of days that are sampled, distributed it over the full year, because you would like to have measures that are representative of pattern of what, over the year rather than of a specific period. If year-long enumeration is not possible, well, at least ensure that collection is spread proportionally over the days of the week, so that you have the same number, you have a representation for the working week, the working days, and the week days. Yes, I will try to go. And last, most important, use large sample sizes, because this would be what is important to identify effects on specific groups and effects on specific policies. I will skip a number of the other issue, but let me focus. Once the case has been made about measuring, the specific issue is what type of survey measure to use. And the problem here that I mentioned is simply the proliferation of measures. And here are some of the measures that are typically used, which somehow makes the case that the risk of proliferation was very real. The type of general principle that we give to address this problem are as follows. First of all, try to use, whenever possible, a scale from 0 to 10, numerical. Try to use scales that are anchored with verbal labels which represent conceptual absolutes, so completely satisfied or completely dissatisfied. Ask these questions as early as possible in the survey as you can, possibly immediately after information on demography, because there is a real risk otherwise that there would be risk of polluting answer to this question with answers that have been provided to other questions. And finally, try to, in general, to include only one primary evaluative measures in your survey, go from the general to the specific, and use a consistent ordering of positive and negative effect. The result of this general principle is in this core question that the guidelines of the OECD recommend using to NSOs in their surveys, which include one basic questions about evaluations, which is overall, how satisfied are you with life as a whole this day, 0 to 10, a specific question on psychological functioning, overall, to what extent do you feel that the things you do in your life are worthwhile, 0 to 10, and then 3 questions on affect yesterday, or with the same numerical scale, one for happiness, one for worried, one for depression. I had a range of other things to tell you about response bias. Some of the questions that are confronted, some of the general guidelines, the recommendation that the OECD recommends. I don't have the time to go through. Let me just come to the final outcome of the guidance, which basically is in the suggestions of 6 module questions that we are recommended countries to use. The first is the core question that I've described earlier, and which is the minimum that we recommend all countries to rely. It takes around 90 seconds for people to complete, so I think it is a little investment that NSOs can make in order to collect this information. And plus, and this is what I showed before, plus more specific questions for each of the various domains. So, and these are supplementary set of questions for those countries that are interested in making a specific investment in understanding some of these additional dimensions. So a module for affect questions, for, in fact, a module for life evaluation, a module for domain evaluations. There are 2 options recommended in the service for measures of affect, which are based on the experiences that are done by both by the US time use service and the French time use service, and question for experience well-being. What comes next? I mean, of course, we didn't expect this to be the final word on the OECD, nor obviously on research in this field. We expect very much that the evidence based on this measure will improve dramatically in the years ahead as better quality data becomes available from national statistical offices. Hopefully, as they will apply questions that try to reflect some of the guidance that have been provided in the guidelines. The OECD is planning on our side to a review process for these measures in the next few years, and this with a view of deciding whether either the guidelines will need revisiting on our side, or whether it is important and possible to move towards a higher degree of international standardization, the possibility of a standard in these fields that they exist in other accounts. Of course, it will be a decision that is not the OECD that takes, they will have to go to the UN bodies in these fields, but it is something that we will consider in the future. In the near term, we will be working over the next couple of years to promote the uptake of these guidelines for a series of workshops that are mainly directed to statistical offices. The first one will take place in New York City, and we hope very much to see there some representative of the Latin American countries, but then we will have similar workshop in Europe and the Asia-Pacific region. So the guidelines are available and can be downloaded for free at this address, and I hope very much that you will find them interesting and a useful guide for your own work. Thank you very much.